Two things I knew when I was a teenager. I wasn't very cool. And number two, my parents definitely weren't cool. That wasn't my opinion, that just was a fact. And somewhere in her apartment right now, my mom's like, I was cool. I'm not saying I was like John Hughes outcast, but I wasn't sneaking out on the weekends with the in crowd to go to parties. I spent most of my weekends traveling up and down the East Coast, going to soccer tournaments with my parents. All that changed as soon as I got to college. I had upper-class teammates to buy me beer and throw off-campus parties, and I took advantage. My GPA didn't. I quickly had my first spring break plans lined up with my teammate and friend Megan, who was from Virginia as well, but from the exotic Southeast region, Virginia Beach. She promised me days of sand, house parties, and a very important excursion to get my belly button pierced. How could I pass up this opportunity? First night, belly button pierced, check. Then we hit up some clubs. And let me tell you, nothing's better for a fresh body piercing than the sterile environment only a club in Virginia Beach can offer. Yep. Second night found us at a friend's house for a party, and the place was packed, the vibes were good. We had just settled into some card games when that one word rang out that ends a party immediately. Cops. I turned to Megan to ask what we should do, and she was gone, like gone. And a friend of hers taps me on the shoulder and was like, hey, don't worry, Megan had to dip. 90s slang. Megan had to dip. She was busted for a fake ID earlier in the year, so she can't afford to get caught. But we're gonna be fine, just stay calm. And she was right. The cops were very cool, no yelling, no handcuffs. They just calmly asked us to leave, almost as if we were wasting their time. Despite this, I was still riding the high of adrenaline with this brush with the law. Going through the neighborhood, looking for Megan, expecting her to army crawl out of out of a ditch to escape capture. We eventually reconnected and headed back to the house to kick the keg the cops had fortunately not found. I left Virginia Beach with two things: a very infected belly button and what I thought was a very cool story. Now, the reason my parents let me go to Virginia Beach was if I came home for the second half of spring break to hang out with them. Normally, so my dad drove 5 hours round trip just to pick me up in Williamsburg, where my brother lived, which is insane because I have to do like 10 minutes of breathing exercises to go to Tyson's. But anyway. So normally our interaction would go something like this. Hey, Dad. Hey, Ann. And then I put my earphones on for the rest of the trip and listen to my angsty alternative music. But not this time. This time, I had a story about the Virginia Beach experience, and he was gonna hear it. And with the confidence of a longtime drinking buddy versus underage daughter of said parent, I told him my harrowing tale. He listened, and at the end said, well, that sounds really exciting. I'm glad you had a good time. I was like, we're keeping this conversation going. So I was like, hey, you were in a fraternity, and you were in the military. You have to have some stories. He just kind of shrugged and said, not really. A little bit later into the drive, we passed the city of Richmond where he went to school. And he turns and goes, well, there was this one time. My dad proceeds to tell me about a night that he and his fraternity brother wanted to go out to have a few beers. So they chose a bar that they knew didn't card underage students. Perfect place to just have a low-key night. As they settled into the bar, a stranger approached them and started yelling at my dad's friend, screaming that they had a past issue and they were gonna hash it out right now. My dad and his friend had never met this man, and they assured him it was just a case of mistaken identity, but he would not let up. Not wanting to make a scene, they took it outside. As they're squaring up in the parking lot, another stranger comes out, and he has these crazy eyes, unkempt clothes, and he pulls a knife on the instigator, holds it up to his throat. They have a discussion. It turns out he knows one of my father's other fraternity brothers. And he offered to kill the man who was, and they quickly were like, no, please don't do that. He lets the instigator go. He probably went home to change his pants. Turns around, looks at my father and his friend and said, do you all want to go to a party? So, of course, their answer to a knife-wielding stranger was sure. So they follow Crazy Eyes to a house off campus they had never been to. But when they go inside, they see some of their fraternity brothers, so they feel a little bit better about the situation. And after a few drinks, my dad said there was a ruckus at one of the doors. So he gets up with everyone else to leave. And as he takes a step outside, he just sees police approaching the house. So he's, I can't go that way. Goes back inside, ducks into the first room that's open. And he's confronted with stacks of automatic weapons, ammunition, and grenades. And he realizes he is about to be caught in a very compromising position. So he ducks behind the door and kind of pulls it close in front of him, so he's behind the door, hoping that he'll get a moment where he can escape. And sure enough, the cops run in, they look around, they start yelling, we gotta find the owner of the house. They run out, he takes his opportunity, sprints out into the night, doesn't stop till he gets back to his room. And then he probably just went to sleep because he's a guy. Like, the next day, the fraternity brothers, there's a local paper and they're looking through it, and there's a headline, Cuban sympathizer house raided. So my dad's wrapping up this story, and my mind is blown. I'm asking him these questions, primarily, are you making this up? Are you making this up? Are you lying to me? And he hits me with what I think is the best part of the story, which is sometime later, Life magazine did a feature on Fidel Castro, and in one of the pictures in the background with Castro is Crazy Eyes. So, I asked my dad for another story. He was like, no, that's all I have. Sure. And, it's funny how your youth frames your perception of things, especially your parents. Up until this point, the things I could have told you about my dad included that he didn't use the air conditioner in the car. It was windows only. His snore would shake every room of the house. He could fall asleep watching anything on TV, but if you changed the channel, he'd wake up and be like, I was watching that. Now I'm faced with this reality of he has crazy college stories. He broke the law. Like, what else didn't I know about him? And was he cool? Was I allowed to think that my dad was cool after this story? After he passed, I found myself telling the story a lot. And when I first would tell it, I would talk about how he one-upped what I thought was my first cool story. But then, as things progressed, I realized it was a story about us. It was a story I was going to be able to tell about my dad. It'll be a story that I'll tell my daughter about her grandfather, and that she can't go to parties anytime soon. And it feels like my responsibility to tell this story about my dad when he was a young man and he just wanted to have a drink with his friends and maybe get into a little trouble. And it's the story that made me realize I had a long way to go before I was going to be ever as cool as my dad.